I've actually forgotten how it goes.
Well, this is like the start of the video, so you're like, yo.
Hello. Welcome to Parkside. Nope.
This is not this is Parkside. But this
Welcome to Project 15.
is Project 15.
This is Project 15.
And this is day number 25. We're going to read from Genesis 40 about
The Cupbreaker, the Cupbearer, and the Baker. I can't read. Sorry.
the cupbearer and the baker. Pause.
And then come back.
G'day teenagers. Well, as you know, we have been exploring the book of Genesis. And in the second part of the book of Genesis, the text zeroes in and focuses on the life and the family of one man whose name was Abraham. God comes to Abraham and gives him these wonderful promises that he's going to turn him into a great nation. He's going to give him children and descendants who are going to become the people of God. And we can see in the book of Genesis how God is faithful to this promise and how he fulfills it through Abraham's life and through the lives of his children. So Abraham has a son, Isaac. Isaac has a son, Jacob. So Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. And then Jacob will have 12 sons of his own. And these 12 sons will become the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, a few episodes ago, the text started to zero in on the life of Jacob's second youngest son, Joseph. Now, there is hostility between Joseph and his brothers because Joseph is favored by his father, Jacob. And Joseph ends up having a couple of dreams, and his brothers get upset at the meaning of these dreams, so they sell him into slavery. And Joseph ends up being a servant or a slave in the household of a very high-ranking Egyptian official. The high-ranking Egyptian official is Potiphar. He is the captain of Pharaoh's guard, meaning he's basically the head of Pharaoh's security detail. And in our last episode, we noticed that Joseph gets himself into a situation where he ends up in prison, and it's not his fault. Potiphar's wife starts to like and fall in love with Joseph, and she attempts to seduce him, but Joseph does not want to commit adultery, so he flees from the situation. But unfortunately, Potiphar's wife, having had her feelings hurt or her honor shamed, she ends up in a situation where she accuses him, and Joseph ends up in prison. Now, he's in prison in the dungeons or under house arrest in the captain of Pharaoh's guards, in that very household. So Potiphar obviously has some dungeons where he keeps political prisoners, and Joseph ends up under house arrest in these dungeons. And he's a prisoner alongside a couple of political prisoners who get themselves into trouble with the Pharaoh. And this is where Genesis chapter 40 picks up. Let's look at what the text says. Sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials, and he put them in prison where Joseph was, in the palace of the captain of the guard. They remained in prison for some time, and the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph to look after them. While they were in prison, Joseph's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they were both upset. So, as Genesis chapter 40 explains, because Joseph was falsely accused, he spends a stint in prison. And he's in prison in the house of the captain of the guard, in the dungeons. And he's in prison with two other people who are political prisoners. They held very important offices in Pharaoh's court. One of them was the chief cupbearer, the other was the chief baker. So obviously Pharaoh would have had a number of servants, and he would have had a number of people who managed his household and who ensured that his household ran appropriately and effectively, and he would have had a number of people who were his advisors in his royal court. And two of these chief servants end up being political prisoners because some sort of conspiracy has taken place. The Pharaoh was obviously the most important position in ancient Egypt, and pharaohs had threats on their lives. So it was important to make sure that they had good people around them, good advisors who protected them so that they couldn't be removed from power or killed or poisoned in some way. It was very, very common in the ancient world for leaders and kings to be dethroned, to be killed or poisoned by their own family even, or by rivals to the throne. So Pharaoh needed to have people around him who he could trust. And two of these chief positions were his chief baker, meaning his head chef, or the one who ran and cooked all of his food, and the cupbearer. Now, the cupbearer was usually a person of significant community standing, somebody with good reputation who the Pharaoh could trust. And he exercised a position in the Pharaoh's court. He was almost like an advisor or a chief advisor. And his principal responsibility as cupbearer was basically to be a food tester for Pharaoh, to test his food, to drink his food, to taste a bit of his food, so that nobody had attempted to poison the Pharaoh. So these two positions, the chief baker, the head chef, and also the cupbearer, were two extremely important positions in the ancient world. And these two officials end up in prison on some sort of conspiracy charges. Most likely a threat was made against the Pharaoh's life, and he puts these two in prison in order to sort it out. And whilst they're in prison, they have two dreams. They each have a dream. And Joseph will interpret the dreams for them. Now, in the ancient world, most people were either monotheist, meaning that they worshipped one god, or they were polytheist, meaning that they worshipped many gods. And people believed, whether you worshipped one god or many gods, they believed that God could speak to people through dreams. They believed if you were a monotheist, you believed that God could give you a dream which had significance. If you're a polytheist, you believed that the gods could give you dreams. And they believed that the dreams carried meanings and messages. And on this night, both the chief cupbearer and the chief baker have a dream. Now, in the ancient world, they would sometimes go to people to interpret the meaning of these dreams. They would have dream books where they would record different dreams that people had had, and they had worked out ways of trying to interpret the symbolism and the meaning of these dreams. So they come to Joseph and they each tell Joseph the meaning of their dreams. The first, the cupbearer, has a dream in which he sees 3 branches and he sees a whole bunch of grapes appear. And then in the dream, he sees him squeezing the grapes into a goblet and presenting it to the Pharaoh. Meanwhile, the chief baker has a dream in which he sees 3 baskets on his head, each filled with bread. And the top basket is attacked by birds who start to eat at the bread. And Joseph, being somebody who follows the true and the living God, doesn't go to some pagan magical textbook to try to interpret the meaning of this book. A man who knows God relies on God to interpret the meaning of these dreams. And Joseph tells the chief cupbearer that in 3 days' time, he would be restored to his position. So he will be discovered not to have been involved in this conspiracy, and he will be found to be innocent in the investigation, and he will be released. Meanwhile, the chief baker, his interpretation is not good. He will be discovered to having been guilty of conspiring against the Pharaoh, and he will be executed. And 3 days later, the meaning of the dreams come true. The chief cupbearer is restored to his position because he was innocent, whereas the chief baker was executed for the crime of treason against the Pharaoh. Now, Joseph would ask the chief cupbearer and say to him, listen, when you are released, please remember me. Please remember that I'm an innocent man, that I've done nothing wrong, that I should not be here. And as the story goes, Joseph will eventually be released from prison, but it will take a number of years. So how might we apply a story like this, teenagers? Well, I want to remind you that Joseph is in prison for doing nothing wrong. The technical term is persecution. Joseph is being persecuted because he was faithful and loyal to God. He could have slept with Potiphar's wife. He could have committed an adulterous relationship, but he wanted to be faithful and loyal to God. And there are people today that end up in prison, or they end up being executed or tortured or persecuted because they remain faithful to God. There are people all around the world who put their trust in Jesus, who serve him faithfully and proclaim the good news to people. And there are others who don't like that and they get persecuted. Well, Joseph was being persecuted because of his faithfulness and his integrity and his loyalty to God. But God did not forget Joseph's loyalty. God was faithful. And I want to encourage you teenagers with that message. Sometimes the world will reject you because of your faithfulness and because of your loyalty to God. You have to follow Joseph's example. And even if the world rejects you for following God, even if you end up being persecuted or people mock you or ridicule, you have to stay loyal and faithful to God. Well, thank you for your time today, teenagers. God bless you. Let's go now into our time of prayer, and we'll see you next episode.